Hi again. So, in this lecture, we're going to see what we will need to program a BIOS chip. So, as you can see here in the picture, this is the BIOS chip here. Okay. So, what is the things that we will need to program it? So, for the BIOS chip, you can find usually the BIOS chip that is used in the motherboards is the BIOS chip with 8 pins, as you can see. But you can find also other BIOS chip, for example, like this BIOS chip, or even an SMD BIOS chip. But as I told to you, this is the most BIOS chip that is used in the motherboards, as you can see here. So let's see what is the things that we will need to program the BIOS. So as you see here, we have 4 things here. We have the BIOS chip, the programmer, the mini-pro software, and the bin files. We will see all this step by step. So the first thing that you should have is the BIOS chip that you want to program. The second thing is the programmer itself, as you can see. So this is one kind of the programmer, as you can see. So the programmer is the tool that you should use to program the BIOS. Of course, the programmer has other accessories that we're going to see in the next lecture step by step. It has the USB cables, some adapters, BIOS chip extractor, and other accessories. We're going to see all this step by step. So of course you can find another programmer like this. As you can see, this is another programmer in the shape of the USB. Okay, as you can see, of course this programmer also has many accessories. Anyway, we will see all this in the next lectures. Okay, so we have seen the BIOS chip, the programmer, and the third thing is the mini pro is the software. Okay, so for every programmer it has a software that you will use to program the BIOS chip. As you can see, for example, this is a mini pro. This is a software for a mini pro programmer. As you can see, it looks like this. As you can see, this is just an example of software, but this is the software that the most technicians use. As you can see, here we have Mini Pro, here we have File, select IC. So here, over here you can select the IC. We will see all this in the next lectures, step by step. You can read using this button, you can program using this button, etc. We're going to see all this in detail. Of course, the programmer is an executive file, as you can see. So, as you can see here, application exe. So the programmer, as you can see, is an executive file that you can execute and install in your computer. Next, you should have the files, the bin files or the binary files. So let's check. As you can see, so we have the IC chip that we want to program, the programmer, and the software that we will use to program the chip, the BIOS chip. So the firmware, as you can see, this is the firmware, as you can see. For example, as you see, its extension is bin file. So let's check properties, as you can see. So as you can see here, not executive file, no, this is a bin file, okay, means a binary file. So for example, I have here 2 bin files. This is for the HP Pavilion DV6, as you can see. Here we have the type is bin file, as you can see, okay, and here the size. As I told you, this file is with the size of 4 megabyte. As you can see, 4 megabyte, 4096 kilobytes equal to 4 megabyte. Okay, so as you can see here, this is the reference of the chip. We have here 25Q32. As you see, 32 means 4 megabyte, as we have seen in the previous lecture, because 32 divided by 8 equal 4. Okay, and here, as you can see, for 4, as you can see before, 4 megabit means 512 kilobytes. Okay, for every laptop and every computer, it has its firmware. Okay, so let's take a look inside the firmware. So let's open this firmware, for example, using the Notepad++. As you can see, this is the firmware. It's unreadable. You cannot read this firmware, okay? But the programmer can read this and can understand this, okay? So this is the firmware, okay? And I want to add that for every laptop and every BIOS chip, it has its firmware. For example, this firmware is for the HP Pavilion DV6. So if you want, for example, a firmware for Dell laptop, for example, you can just type in Google Dell, the model of laptop and firmware, BIOS firmware, and you can download the firmware with the bin extension, okay, and program your BIOS chip. Of course, you should have the programmer and the software. Okay, so let's summarize. So to program a BIOS chip, you will need first the BIOS chip itself, the programmer, the software, okay, and firmware or the bin file. Okay,